So I literally would receive boxes from each factory and I would try a product from every single batch. So like I would take all of these 20, 30, 40 bars a day, cut them into pieces, and I would try from every product every day. That was like for many years. If you looked at my face, I looked like a Kind bar because that's like how many Kind bars I was eating at the time. Hello, this is Daniel Lubetzky. I'm the founder of Kind, and this is how I made my first million. I grew up in Mexico City. We came to the United States when I turned 16 to San Antonio, Texas. My mom was a homemaker. She took very good care of us. And my dad was an entrepreneur. My dad was an extraordinary figure. He arrived to Mexico with a third grade education. He had been a Holocaust survivor that had robbed from an education at the age of 9 and was liberated by American soldiers when he was 15 and a half. Then was in a refugee camp and arrived in Mexico when he was 17, and he didn't speak Spanish or English, only had a third grade education. So he educated himself by reading used books and used encyclopedias cover to cover, volume A, volume B, volume C. He spoke 9 languages by the time he passed away, had read thousands of books. He was one of the most educated, self-made people. And he started working in factories 2 or 3 shifts in a row, till eventually he and his father had a little bit of money and they started a small jewelry shop, which grew till they owned ultimately a chain of duty-free stores on the border between Mexico and the United States. I first went to a Jewish Mexican immigrant school in Mexico City where they taught us Yiddish and Hebrew and Spanish as kids. Then I went to a public high school, Robert E. Lee High School in San Antonio, Texas. Well, when I moved to the United States, I didn't had a permit to live here. We moved here legally, but I didn't have a permit to work. So I had to be an entrepreneur because I was allowed to do that. So I would start my own businesses. I had a lawn mowing business, but I didn't have a lawnmower, so I had to borrow the one from the people whose lawns I tried to mow. And I had a car washing business with my cousin. I also had little businesses here and there, culminating before law school with business selling watches. I sold them in flea markets. Eventually, we had different booths in different shopping malls selling watches, and I had a network of students selling watches to all the administrators and the teachers and the professors and to each other, and it was a lot of fun. I went to Trinity University in San Antonio and Stanford Law School. I worked at a couple law firms for little stints during the summers, but these were all stints right after law school or in between law school. But what happened is I was very passionate about the Arab-Israeli conflict, around trying to resolve or contribute towards resolving the Arab-Israeli conflict. And I got a fellowship to go to the Middle East to research, to turn my college thesis into practice. And I actually ended up taking a leave of absence from the law firm that I was going to join and starting PeaceWorks. The partner thought that I was going to give up after 6 months. I thought that it was going to become an incredible success, but it ended up being my vocation and my passion for 10 years. But it's at PeaceWorks where I learned so much of the food space, and it's all those mistakes at PeaceWorks that, with the benefit of self-reflection and improvement, benefited me when we launched Kind. When I was doing PeaceWorks, just so you get an idea, I was literally knocking on doors, walking the streets of Manhattan, going from 122nd and Broadway down, all the way to Financial District where we're filming, then crossing and going all the way up Broadway. I would start east and then go west, or west and then go east. And along the way, when I was like spending the long day, skipping lunch or dinner, and I wanted a healthy snack, I couldn't find something that I could feel good about eating. And I'm like, wow, if I don't find it, I'm sure others also have that need. So I was on the lookout for a healthy snack, for something that was wholesome but also convenient, that was healthy but also tasty, and that's how we came up with the idea for what became Kind. When we started making Kind bars, it was all done by hand. All of the industry relies on what's called extruded products. Every one of our leading competitors takes a bunch of ingredients, macerates them beyond recognition, and then plops them what's called slab bars, because it's a slab of this homogeneous stuff, but it's unrecognizable. You don't know what you're eating. With Kind, we wanted to celebrate nature and use whole nuts, whole fruits, whole grains, and really, really preserve their identity so they don't oxidize and so that they're as nature intended. And that's actually much harder to do because it doesn't flow as easily through the line. So initially everything was made by hand and we had to cut the product in the lines. And over the course of years, we developed ways to automate the process. And today, we make tens of millions of bars a day. The center of the tasting for Kind bars was me. For many, many, many years, like that was my lunch and dinner because I was so obsessive that I would not, even once we were making the product, and particularly as we were scaling, and then we had one factory, and then two factories, and three factories, and four factories. I was very worried about quality control because in my early years at PeaceWorks, I had made the mistake of not being obsessive about quality and disappointed my consumers, and they had punished me for it by stopping to buy our PeaceWorks products. So I was determined not to make that mistake with Kind. So I literally would receive boxes from each factory, and I would try a product from every single batch. So like I would take all of these 20, 30, 40 bars a day, cut them into pieces, and I would try from every product every day. That was like for many years. If you looked at my face, I looked like a Kind bar because that's like how many Kind bars I was eating at the time. When I started Kind, it was an offshoot of PeaceWorks, and I had not delivered an investment for my investors at PeaceWorks, so I rolled them over into Kind so that they would have a chance at getting their money back. And what would have turned out to be probably the worst investment in history probably became one of the best investments in history. They got anywhere from 1,000x to 5,000x, which is crazy, but that's how Kind exploded once we started doing things right. But honestly, other than my initial investment of $100,000 from my closest friends, nobody wanted to invest in me. So I held on to most of the company, not out of choice or wisdom, but just because nobody wanted to invest. It was not until late 2008, early 2009 that I finally brought in a private equity investment of $5.1 million. And that was the only time that we brought in money for primary shares into the company to supposedly grow the companies. We actually didn't need the money because the company was profitable, and that was 2009, and that was the last time we ever received primary shares. We never needed more. One of the mistakes I made that I encourage entrepreneurs not to make is that I left my fate in the hands of my investors, of my private equity investors, and their interests ended up not being aligned with me. You really need to be careful when you get an investment to get it with someone that's aligned with you and that really wants to have the vision, and also recognize that your vision might change. Because when I did this thing, I said 5 years later I want to sell Kind, that's fine. But then I realized I had reached that zenith and realized that there was a much higher one, and I was just getting started and I wanted to continue doing it. And the private equity investor pushed really hard for us to sell the company. I said, no, I don't want to sell it. So it was a very tough negotiation where I ended up buying them back at a very crazy valuation. They put in, I think, between the primary shares and the money that I brought in secondary for myself and from all of our investors, I would think we had brought in $16 million. They got like $227 million back, plus distributions in the course of 4.5 years. But I got over 80% of the company at the time. The period when the private equity investors were pushing me to sell the company was very painful and difficult. I didn't sleep well for many years. There's just so much intensity in the journey. And so very often time, I couldn't put myself to bed. And that period was one of the many when I was really, really, really worried. And I just worked through it. But right now I can be a little bit nostalgic and proud. But back then, I was frankly just scared. Best business advice I got was from Martin Wender when I was a freshman in college, and I asked him to come speak to my class, and he said, whatever you do it to the best of your ability. Give it the very, very best you got. Give everything you got to whatever you choose, because every morning someone's waking up and doing that. And if you really want to stand out and win, you need to, wherever you're focusing, really deliver your very, very best. We did a transaction where we sold a controlling stake of Kind. I still own a significant portion of Kind, but not a controlling stake. But when we did the closing dinner with my partners, I ended up doing a magic show, and it was a mentalism performance when my colleagues, my bankers, actually thought that I had read their minds, and they were actually like really upset for a while that I had like used that in the negotiations. And like no, it's magic. It's not, I can't really read your mind, but maybe I can.